There was a personalized seat at the table for my daughter-in-law's dog, but somehow there wasn't one for me. I realized as I stood in the middle of my grandson's 8th birthday party, holding a wrapped Lego set against my chest like it was the only thing keeping me upright. I'm Eleanor Whitmore, 71 years old, widowed for nearly 6 years, and until that afternoon, I still believed family embarrassments happened by accident. The Whitmore backyard looked like something out of one of those expensive parenting magazines Vanessa was always reposting online. Blue and silver balloons floated above perfectly arranged picnic tables. A bounce house filled half the lawn. There was a taco station, a dessert cart, custom cookies shaped like baseball gloves, and a massive sign near the pool that read, "Lucas turns 8," in glittering navy letters. Children raced across the grass with juice boxes in their hands while parents stood in neat little groups, sipping iced cocktails from mason jars. Everything looked polished, curated, beautiful in the kind of way that takes weeks of planning and a small fortune to pull off. I stood near the side gate for a moment, adjusting the strap of my purse while nobody noticed I had arrived. Vanessa was busy filming a video on her phone, smiling too brightly as she panned across the decorations. "Perfect day for the perfect boy," she said into the camera before turning it toward Lucas, who was laughing beside the bounce house in a tiny blazer and sneakers that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. My grandson spotted me first. "Grandma," he yelled, running across the lawn with the untamed joy only children still possess. He wrapped his arms around my waist, and for one small moment, the ache inside me softened. "You made it." "Of course I made it," I told him, kissing the top of his blonde hair. "I wouldn't miss your birthday for the world." Daniel finally walked over holding a beer bottle, his smile distracted and tired around the edges. "Hey, Mom," he said, giving me a quick one-armed hug before glancing back toward Vanessa, as if checking whether he was needed somewhere else. "Traffic okay?" "It wasn't bad," I answered, quietly. "Everything looks lovely." "Vanessa went all out," he replied automatically. He said it the way people repeat things often enough that they stop sounding genuine. Vanessa finally approached us wearing a cream-colored jumpsuit and that polished smile she used around guests. "Eleanor," she said sweetly, air-kissing my cheek without actually touching me. "I'm so glad you came." I noticed then that everyone already seemed settled into their places. Each table had carefully written name cards tied to miniature baseball bats. Couples sat together. Children had assigned seats. Even the family dog, Winston, had a little blue cushion beside Vanessa's chair with a sign that read, "Birthday Pup." I smiled faintly at it. Then I looked again, and again. My eyes moved slowly from table to table while a strange heat crept up the back of my neck. There wasn't a place card with my name anywhere. No chair pulled aside. No extra setting. Just families seated neatly together while I stood holding a wrapped present no one had taken from my hands. For one foolish second, I thought perhaps there had been a mistake. Maybe another table was being set up. Maybe someone had moved my chair. But then Vanessa followed my gaze. I watched recognition flash across her face for the briefest moment before she laughed softly and touched my arm. "Oops," she said loudly enough for 2 nearby mothers to hear. "Looks like we forgot one." One of the women gave an awkward little chuckle. The other stared down into her drink. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside me, but said nothing. Not one word. I waited for him to pull over a chair. To say, "Mom, sit here." To do anything that resembled remembering I belonged there. But he only rubbed the back of his neck and looked toward the grill. Vanessa tilted her head sympathetically. "I honestly didn't think we'd run out of seating," she added. "You know how chaotic these things get." Then she turned away before I could answer, already calling out instructions about birthday cupcakes. I stood there another few seconds while conversations resumed around me. Nobody looked directly at me anymore. The music kept playing. Children kept laughing. Somewhere behind me, somebody opened another bottle of soda. It struck me then that humiliation rarely arrives loudly. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it simply removes your chair and waits to see whether anyone notices you're left standing. I finally walked toward the edge of the patio, carrying my paper plate after serving myself from the buffet table. Every seat was occupied. I ended up beside the flower bed near the fence, balancing my food awkwardly in one hand, while guests avoided eye contact out of politeness or discomfort. The sun felt hotter suddenly. The laughter sharper. Across the yard, Vanessa continued filming little moments for social media, capturing her perfect family from every possible angle. Every angle except the one where her husband's elderly mother stood alone beside a hydrangea bush eating cold pasta salad without a place to sit. Then I noticed something else that made my stomach tighten even further. Hanging beside the dessert table was a giant photo collage filled with family memories from the last several years. Beach vacations, Christmas mornings, school recitals, backyard barbecues, birthday dinners. Dozens and dozens of smiling photographs carefully arranged into the shape of the number 8. And somehow, impossibly, I wasn't in a single one of them. I kept staring at that photo collage long after I should have looked away. At first, I told myself maybe I had simply missed my pictures. Maybe there were too many photographs crowded together. But the longer I stood there, the more obvious it became. I was not hidden. I was absent. There were photographs from Lucas's first birthday party where Vanessa's sister appeared 3 different times wearing matching shirts with the family. There were pictures from Christmas mornings where Daniel sat on the floor opening gifts beside Vanessa's parents. There was even a framed snapshot of Winston wearing a red sweater during Thanksgiving dinner. But there was not a single image of me. Not one. I felt something cold settle quietly into my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something worse. Clarity. The strange thing about growing older is that you learn exactly how much silence can say. Nobody had needed to explain this to me. Nobody had needed to say I no longer belonged. They had simply erased me carefully enough that guests could pretend not to notice. Lucas ran past me again carrying a plastic bat almost as tall as he was. "Grandma, did you see the cake yet?" he asked excitedly. I forced a smile onto my face. "Not yet, sweetheart. Mom ordered it from Dallas," he said proudly. "It has real stadium lights." I told him I could not wait to see it. Then he hurried off again before Vanessa called after him not to spill juice on his blazer. I watched him disappear into the crowd of children, and suddenly I remembered all the afternoons he used to spend at my house after preschool. Daniel and Vanessa had both been working then. I used to pick Lucas up every day at 3 o'clock sharp in my old Buick. We would stop for apple slices or chocolate milkshakes on Fridays. Sometimes he would fall asleep on my couch with cartoons playing softly in the background while I folded laundry nearby. Back then, Vanessa used to call me her lifesaver. She said she did not know how they would survive without me. Funny how quickly gratitude fades once people no longer need rescuing. I carried my untouched plate toward the drink table and set it down beside a bowl of melting ice. Nobody noticed. Or maybe they did and simply chose comfort over kindness. Nearby, 2 women whispered quietly while glancing in my direction. I could not hear the words, but I recognized the look immediately. It was the same look people give when they witness something embarrassing and hope someone else steps in first. Daniel finally wandered over 20 minutes later. "You okay, Mom?" he asked softly, keeping his eyes fixed on the crowd instead of me. "I am fine," I answered. He nodded too quickly. "Vanessa has just been stressed. You know how these parties are." There it was. The excuse prepared before the apology. I studied my son's face carefully. He looked older than 42 that afternoon. Tired around the eyes. Thinner than usual. For a second, I almost reached for his hand the way I used to when he was little and nervous about something. But then Vanessa called his name from across the yard, and his attention shifted instantly toward her voice. "I should go help," he murmured. "Of course you should," I thought. He walked away before I answered. A little while later, the birthday song began near the patio. Everyone gathered tightly around the cake table, while phones lifted into the air like tiny glowing windows. I stayed near the back beside the hydrangeas because there was nowhere else for me to stand. Vanessa wrapped one arm around Daniel, while Lucas grinned between them under the candles. It looked like the kind of family moment people frame over fireplaces. Perfect. Complete. Whole. Then Vanessa raised her phone for a selfie with the crowd behind her. "Everybody squeeze in," she called brightly. People moved closer together laughing as they leaned toward the camera. I noticed Daniel glance toward me for half a second. Just half a second. Then the picture was taken without me in it. After the candles were blown out, people rushed toward the dessert table in a wave of cheerful noise, while Vanessa immediately began directing everyone into smaller groups for photographs. "Cousins first," she called brightly. "Then grandparents." I almost laughed at that word. Grandparents. It sounded strangely formal coming from someone who had spent the last 2 hours pretending I was invisible. I stayed near the back patio with my purse resting against my shoulder while parents crowded around their children fixing collars and brushing frosting from little faces. Vanessa moved through the party effortlessly, touching elbows, laughing at stories, complimenting decorations she had chosen herself. She had mastered the art of appearing warm without ever truly being kind. I noticed something else then. Every time someone naturally drifted toward me for conversation, Vanessa somehow interrupted. If one of Daniel's coworkers asked how long I had lived in town, Vanessa would suddenly appear beside us talking about school districts or vacation plans. If another grandmother commented on my necklace, Vanessa redirected attention toward the custom dessert table. It was subtle enough that most people probably never noticed. But once I saw it, I could not stop seeing it. She did not want me included in the atmosphere she had built. I was a wrinkle in the image. A reminder that families existed before social media captions and coordinated holiday cards. Grace Holloway arrived shortly after 3, carrying a gift bag covered in baseballs. Grace and I had known each other for nearly 30 years. Our husbands played golf together before Harold passed away. She spotted me immediately and frowned. "Why are you standing all the way over here?" she asked quietly. "I am fine," I answered automatically. Grace followed my eyes toward the tables. Her expression changed almost instantly. "Eleanor," she said carefully, "where is your seat?" I gave a small shrug as though it did not matter. Apparently, there was a shortage. Grace looked across the yard toward Vanessa, who was posing beside the cake with several neighborhood mothers. "That is nonsense," she muttered under her breath. I counted at least 3 empty chairs near the pool. I said nothing. Sometimes silence protects whatever dignity survives a public humiliation. Grace touched my arm gently. "You know this is intentional, right?" The words landed softly, but they still stung. Because hearing the truth out loud makes it impossible to keep excusing people. I glanced down at my untouched slice of cake balanced on a paper plate. The frosting had started melting in the Texas heat. "I think I have known for a while," I admitted quietly. Grace studied me for a long moment before lowering her voice further. "Last month at the country club luncheon, Vanessa joked that older relatives ruin party aesthetics because they make events feel depressing." My fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the plate. I do not think she expected anyone to repeat it. A strange calm settled over me then. Not shock, not heartbreak, just the slow, painful click of puzzle pieces finally fitting together. Suddenly, every forgotten invitation made sense. Every cropped Christmas photo. Every family dinner where conversations happened around me instead of with me. Vanessa had not been careless. She had been editing me out slowly, one moment at a time. Across the yard, Lucas ran toward me again with blue frosting on his chin. "Grandma, look what I got," he said excitedly, holding up a new baseball glove. I smiled and wiped frosting gently from the corner of his mouth with my napkin. "It is perfect for you," I told him. "You are getting so tall." He grinned proudly. Then his expression shifted slightly as he looked around. "Grandma," he asked innocently, "why are you always standing at our parties?" The question hit harder than anything Vanessa had done all afternoon. Because children only repeat patterns they have already noticed. Lucas's question stayed with me long after the music faded into the background. Children notice everything adults try to disguise. They may not understand cruelty completely, but they recognize patterns. I looked down at my grandson's face and saw genuine confusion there, not malice. To him, I was simply the grandmother who never seemed to sit with the family anymore. "Sometimes parties get crowded," I told him softly. It was the kind of answer adults give children when the real truth feels too heavy to place into small hands. He nodded slowly, accepting it for now, before racing off toward the bounce house again. Grace watched him leave, then turned back to me with sadness in her eyes. "You should not have to explain away being treated badly," she whispered. I forced a small smile. After a certain age, people expect women like me to accept whatever scraps of attention we are given and call it gratitude. Grace shook her head. "Not everyone expects that. But enough people did. Enough that I had spent the last few years shrinking myself to fit comfortably into other people's lives." I thought back to the first Christmas after Harold died. Vanessa insisted they host dinner because she said I needed to rest. I arrived carrying the pecan pie Harold always loved, only to discover they had already eaten appetizers without me because they assumed I would be late. The year after that, my stocking disappeared from the mantel entirely. Vanessa laughed and said there had not been enough hooks. Last Thanksgiving, I spent 4 hours cooking sweet potatoes and homemade rolls, but when dinner started, Vanessa's mother sat beside Daniel, while I ended up squeezed into a folding chair near the kitchen doorway. Every moment had seemed small on its own. Forgettable, even. That was the brilliance of it. Cruelty delivered in tiny portions is easier for everyone else to excuse. A loud insult shocks people. Quiet humiliation simply exhausts its victim over time. Across the yard, Vanessa clinked her glass lightly to gather everyone's attention. Before presents, she announced brightly, I just want to thank all the amazing people who helped make today happen. Guests applauded politely. Vanessa began listing names one by one. Her sister for designing decorations. Her friend Amanda for coordinating desserts. Her parents for helping with catering pickups. Even Daniel's co-worker who lent them extra coolers received a cheerful mention. I stood completely still near the hydrangeas listening to the speech unfold. Then it ended. No mention of me. Not even after I had quietly mailed Lucas $200 for this party 3 weeks earlier, because Daniel mentioned costs were getting high. Grace looked horrified on my behalf. I only nodded faintly as if I had expected nothing else. Because maybe part of me had. Vanessa raised her champagne glass higher. We are just so grateful for the family we have built, she said warmly. Family we have built. The words echoed strangely inside me. Harold and I had helped Daniel buy his first car. Harold co-signed his student loans when banks refused. After Daniel and Vanessa married, I spent nearly every Saturday painting walls and unpacking boxes in their first apartment. When Lucas was born premature, I slept in hospital waiting rooms for 6 nights straight while Vanessa recovered. Families are not built in one generation. They are carried there by invisible hands nobody remembers later. The applause faded, and conversations resumed. I suddenly felt very tired. Not physically, spiritually tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes from standing outside your own life long enough to realize nobody inside plans to invite you back in. I picked up my purse carefully and told Grace I thought I might head home early. Are you sure? She asked gently. I glanced one last time across the crowded backyard. Vanessa was already taking more photographs beside the cake, while Daniel stood nearby, smiling automatically for the camera. Nobody noticed me reaching for my car keys. Nobody asked me to stay. I walked to my Buick slowly with the kind of careful composure women learn after years of swallowing humiliation in public places. The late afternoon sun reflected off the windshields lining the street, while laughter still floated faintly from the backyard behind me. Nobody followed. Nobody called my name. I placed my purse carefully on the passenger seat and sat there for a moment without starting the engine. My hands rested quietly on the steering wheel while I stared through the windshield at nothing in particular. I kept thinking about Lucas asking why I was always standing at their parties. Children tell the truth without realizing it. Somewhere along the way, standing outside the family had become my assigned role. The drive home took almost 40 minutes. Traffic crawled along the interstate while local radio hosts joked about football season returning in the fall. I barely heard any of it. My mind kept replaying small moments from the afternoon with painful clarity. Vanessa laughing about forgetting my seat. Daniel avoiding eye contact. The photo wall without a single image of me. It all felt strangely organized now, as though every tiny humiliation had been rehearsed beforehand. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sky had softened into pale orange streaks above the rooftops. My little brick house looked exactly the same as always. Neat flower beds, white porch swing, wind chimes Harold bought during our anniversary trip to New Mexico 20 years ago. The house suddenly felt quieter than usual when I stepped inside. I kicked off my shoes gently and carried the untouched birthday gift receipt into the kitchen. The silence there was honest at least. No forced smiles. No polite exclusions disguised as accidents. I poured myself a glass of iced tea and stood at the counter staring out the window above the sink. Then I noticed the framed photograph near the coffee maker. Harold and Daniel, both covered in sawdust, standing beside the skeleton frame of Daniel's first house. Harold had spent nearly every weekend helping him renovate that place after work. New floors, kitchen cabinets, roof repairs. We never charged him $1. Family helps family, Harold used to say whenever I worried we were exhausting ourselves. I suddenly realized something painful. Harold believed love created loyalty automatically. So did I? We were wrong. Sometimes people simply become accustomed to sacrifice without respecting the person making it. I opened the refrigerator absent-mindedly and saw the casserole dish I had prepared for Daniel's family earlier that week. Chicken tetrazzini. Lucas's favorite. Vanessa texted Tuesday asking whether I could make extra because things had been hectic lately. The dish sat untouched on my refrigerator shelf, wrapped carefully in foil because nobody had come by to pick it up yet. I closed the refrigerator slowly. Then I did something small that somehow felt enormous. I threw the casserole away. Not angrily. Calmly. Quietly. The foil crinkled softly as it disappeared into the trash can. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Daniel. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hey, Mom," he said. His voice sounded distracted, like he was multitasking while talking to me. "You left kind of suddenly." I looked around my silent kitchen. "Did I?" There was a pause. "Vanessa said maybe you were not feeling well." Of course she did. That explanation protected everyone nicely. Easier to suggest the old woman became tired than admit she had nowhere to sit. "I am fine," I answered evenly. "The party looked successful." "Yeah," he replied quickly. "Lucas had a great time." Another silence settled between us. I waited for him to say something else. Anything real. An apology. A question. Some acknowledgement of what happened. Instead, he cleared his throat softly. "Oh, and Mom, Vanessa wanted me to remind you about next Saturday. We might need you to watch Lucas overnight because we got invited to Amanda's anniversary dinner." I closed my eyes for a brief second. There it was again. My role in the family had become painfully simple. Needed in private. Removed in public. Useful behind the scenes. Invisible in the photographs. "I do not think I can next weekend," I said quietly. Daniel sounded surprised. "Really?" "Yes," I replied. "I have plans." The truth was, I did not have any plans at all. But for the first time in years, I realized maybe I needed to stop rearranging my life for people who had already rearranged theirs to exclude me. The next morning felt unfamiliar in the quietest possible way. For years, my Saturdays had belonged to Daniel's family. Grocery runs for birthday supplies. Picking up dry cleaning. Watching Lucas while Vanessa attended yoga classes or brunches or charity planning meetings. My weekends were stitched into their lives so tightly that I barely noticed how little space remained for my own. But that morning, sunlight drifted through my kitchen windows while my coffee brewed, and for the first time in years, nobody had texted me a list of errands before 8 o'clock. I sat at the small wooden table Harold built decades ago and listened to the silence carefully. It no longer sounded lonely. It sounded peaceful. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a message from Vanessa. "Hey, Eleanor. Forgot to ask yesterday. Could you pick up Lucas from baseball practice Tuesday? I have a spa appointment." No greeting beyond convenience. No mention of the party. No acknowledgement at all. I stared at the message for a long moment before placing the phone face down beside my coffee cup. 20 minutes later, another text arrived. "Also, we might need help Thursday night too." Need. That word appeared constantly now. Never invitation. Never appreciation. Only need. I thought about all the years I had responded immediately. All the afternoons I canceled plans with friends because Daniel sounded stressed on the phone. All the evenings I drove across town during thunderstorms because Vanessa needed an emergency babysitter. I had told myself I was supporting family. But somewhere along the line, support became expectation. And expectation became entitlement. By Tuesday afternoon, I still had not answered the messages. Not out of cruelty. I simply wanted to know what would happen if I stopped rescuing everyone the second they reached for me. Around 4 o'clock, Daniel finally called. "Mom, did you see Vanessa's texts?" he asked without preamble. I did. "So are you picking Lucas up?" I looked out my living room window toward the bird feeder swaying gently in the wind. "No, Daniel." Silence. Why not? It was such a simple question, yet something about it unsettled me deeply. Not because he sounded angry. Because he sounded genuinely confused. As though my refusal made no logical sense. "I have other things to do," I answered calmly. "Like what?" I almost smiled at that. Mothers spend decades teaching children independence only to realize some of them never learned that other people possess independent lives too. "Personal things," I replied softly. Daniel exhaled heavily. "Mom, Vanessa already booked the appointment." Then I suppose she should not have assumed my answer before asking. Another long pause followed. I could practically hear him struggling to decide whether this conversation was truly about baseball practice. Finally, he lowered his voice slightly. "Are you upset about Saturday?" There was at last. Not an apology. just recognition that consequences had begun appearing. I traced my fingers slowly along the rim of my coffee mug. Should I be? He hesitated. Mom, it was just a misunderstanding. I thought about the missing chair, the photo wall, the forgotten thank you speech. Lucas asking why I always stood alone at parties. No, I said quietly. Misunderstandings happen once. Patterns happen repeatedly. Daniel did not answer immediately. Somewhere in the background, I heard Vanessa speaking sharply about traffic and reservations. Even through the muffled noise, I could hear irritation in her tone. Look, Daniel finally said, sounding exhausted. Things have just been hectic lately. I closed my eyes briefly. Hectic. Another convenient word people use when kindness becomes too inconvenient to offer. I understand, I told him. That is why I think it is best everyone manages their own schedules for a while. After we hung up, I expected guilt to settle over me the way it usually did any time I disappointed my son. Instead, I felt something else entirely. Relief. Quiet, unfamiliar relief. For years I had mistaken constant availability for love. But love should not require disappearing piece by piece until there is nothing left of you except usefulness. 3 weeks passed before I heard real strain in Daniel's voice. Up until then, Vanessa continued sending cheerful messages pretending nothing had changed. Hope you are doing well. Lucas misses your pancakes. Let us know if you can help Friday. Every text carried the same invisible expectation underneath it. They believed my distance was temporary. A mood. Something that would fade once I remembered my role again. But something inside me had shifted quietly after that birthday party. I no longer rushed to fix problems nobody cared whether they created for me. I started filling my days differently instead. I joined Grace for morning walks around the lake twice a week. I attended a gardening class at the community center. One Saturday afternoon, I even drove 40 miles to a little antique fair in Fredericksburg just because I wanted to. The strangest part was realizing how large the world still felt once I stopped orbiting around Daniel's household every hour of the week. Then one Thursday evening my phone rang just after dinner. Daniel sounded exhausted before he even spoke. Mom, are you busy? I glanced at the crossword puzzle resting unfinished beside my tea. Not particularly. He exhaled heavily. We are having a rough week over here. I listened quietly while he explained that Lucas's after-school program had increased its rates again. Vanessa's spa contract job had unexpectedly reduced her hours. Their usual babysitter quit 2 days earlier because she accepted a full-time position elsewhere. Everything just keeps piling up, he admitted. In the background, I could hear cabinets slamming and Vanessa speaking sharply about bills. And honestly, Daniel added carefully, we got so used to having your help that we probably did not realize how much you actually handled. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. Not because it was dramatic, because it sounded sincere for the first time in a long while. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Families help each other, I said quietly. Yes, he replied. But I think we stopped appreciating it. I did not answer immediately. Outside my kitchen window, evening rain tapped softly against the porch railing. The silence between us felt heavier than before, but less hostile somehow. Then Daniel spoke again, lower this time. Lucas keeps asking why you do not come over anymore. That sentence settled deep inside me. Not because it created guilt, because it reminded me who had never truly excluded me in the first place. Children love honestly until adults teach them conditions. I love Lucas very much, I said carefully. Then come by this weekend, Daniel replied quickly, relief creeping into his voice. We can grill burgers or something simple. For a moment, I considered saying yes immediately the way I always used to. But then I remembered balancing a paper plate beside the hydrangeas because there had been no chair for me. I remembered the photo wall, the missing acknowledgement, the casual ease of being erased. I do not think I am ready for that yet, I answered softly. Daniel fell quiet again. Mom, he finally said, Vanessa feels like you are punishing us. I looked around my peaceful kitchen with its warm lamplight and Harold's old records stacked neatly near the bookshelf. Punishment. Interesting word. People often call it punishment when they lose access to someone they took for granted. No, I replied gently. I am simply learning how to stop abandoning myself. Another long pause followed. Then Daniel surprised me. I should have said something that day, he admitted quietly. My chest tightened slightly. It was the closest thing to an apology he had offered yet. Yes, I said. You should have. Neither of us spoke for several seconds after that. Finally, he sighed. I do not know how things got this way, but I did. Things become this way slowly. One ignored feeling at a time. One swallowed insult at a time. One empty chair at a time. Before hanging up, Daniel asked if he could bring Lucas by sometime next week after baseball practice. Just Lucas? I asked gently. Yeah, he answered after a brief hesitation. Just Lucas. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled. The following Tuesday, I spent the afternoon baking blueberry muffins before Lucas arrived. Not because anyone asked me to, simply because I wanted the house to smell warm and familiar again. By 4:30, Daniel's truck pulled into the driveway. Lucas jumped out before the engine fully stopped and ran straight toward my porch, carrying his baseball glove under one arm. Grandma, he shouted happily. I had not realized how much I missed hearing pure excitement attached to my name. Easy there. I laughed softly as he nearly crashed into me. You are getting taller every single week. Daniel walked up the driveway more slowly, hands buried in his pockets. He looked tired again, but different this time. Less defensive, more thoughtful. Thanks for doing this, he said quietly. You did not have to. I studied him for a moment before nodding gently. I know. Something shifted across his face at that answer. Perhaps he finally understood the difference between obligation and generosity. Lucas disappeared inside immediately after spotting the muffins cooling on the kitchen counter. You made these for me, he asked with wide eyes. I may have made them for myself, I teased. But I suppose I can share. His laughter filled the kitchen in a way the silence had missed. Daniel lingered near the doorway watching us. I forgot how much he likes being here, he admitted quietly. I almost said, he used to be here nearly every day. But I kept the thought to myself. Some truths work better when people discover them alone. After Daniel left for a work meeting, Lucas and I sat at the kitchen table together while he told me about school, baseball practice, and the class hamster that escaped during math last week. Children move through stories the way birds move through air. Effortlessly. Naturally. Somewhere in the middle of his second muffin, he looked up at me suddenly. Mom and Dad fight more now. The words came casually, but they tightened something inside my chest. Sometimes adults get stressed, I answered carefully. Lucas nodded. Dad says everybody is tired all the time. I poured him another glass of milk slowly. Being busy can make people forget important things. Like what? He asked. I looked at the little boy sitting across from me with blueberry crumbs on his chin and Harold's exact blue eyes. Like making people feel loved, I said softly. He seemed to think about that for a moment before changing the subject back to baseball statistics. Children instinctively move away from sadness when they can. Later that evening, while Lucas worked on homework at the dining room table, my phone buzzed with a message from Vanessa. Thank you again for helping today. We really appreciate it. I stared at the text longer than necessary. It was polite, careful, but still strangely formal, as though she were speaking to a temporary employee instead of family. A second message followed a minute later. Also, Daniel mentioned you seemed upset about the birthday party. I honestly think things got blown out of proportion. There it was. Not apology. Management. Damage control wrapped in soft language. I set the phone down without answering. Across the table, Lucas concentrated hard on spelling words while absent-mindedly swinging his legs beneath the chair. The chair. Funny how one missing seat had revealed so much about where I stood in that family. Around 7 o'clock, Daniel returned to pick Lucas up. He paused in the kitchen doorway after seeing the homework spread across the table and the empty muffin wrappers beside Lucas's backpack. For a moment, his expression looked almost nostalgic. This feels like old times, he said quietly. I folded Lucas's sweater carefully before handing it over. Some old times were good, I replied. Daniel nodded slowly. Then his eyes drifted toward the dining room, chairs surrounding my table. For matching oak chairs Harold built by hand nearly 25 years ago. Sturdy, balanced, permanent. Mom, he said after a long silence. I think we forgot how much you held everything together. I looked at him calmly. No, I answered gently. You just stopped noticing because I made it look easy. 2 months later, Thanksgiving arrived with the first sharp, cold front of the season sweeping through Texas. The grocery stores were crowded. Christmas decorations already glowed from neighborhood porches. Everywhere I looked, families seemed busy, preparing traditions that looked warm and effortless from the outside. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving, Daniel called again. His voice sounded hesitant in a way I had never heard before. Mom, he began carefully. We were hoping you would come Thursday. I stood in my kitchen slowly peeling apples for a pie. Were you? I asked gently. He exhaled softly on the other end of the line. I know things have been strained. Strained. Another small word trying to cover something much larger. Lucas really wants you there, he added quietly. I imagined my grandson sitting somewhere nearby, probably pretending not to listen while actually hearing every word. Will there be a seat for me this time? The silence that followed stretched long enough to say everything neither of us wanted to say directly. Finally, Daniel answered in a low voice. Yes, there will. Thanksgiving afternoon arrived gray and cold, but I took my time getting ready anyway. I wore Harold's favorite pearl earrings, and the deep green sweater Grace once said made my eyes look younger. When I arrived at Daniel's house, the driveway was already full. Through the windows, I could see warm lights glowing against crowded dining tables. For a brief moment, I considered turning around and driving home. Then the front door opened before I even reached the porch. Lucas burst outside grinning. "Grandma," he yelled, throwing his arms around me so hard I nearly lost my balance. "You came. I told you I would try." I laughed softly. Behind him, Daniel stood quietly in the doorway. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom." "Happy Thanksgiving," I replied. Then I stepped inside. The house smelled like turkey, cinnamon, and rosemary stuffing. Football played softly from the living room television while relatives moved through the kitchen carrying casserole dishes and wine glasses. It looked like every Thanksgiving we had ever shared together, yet somehow entirely different. Because this time I noticed something immediately. At the center dining table sat a place setting with my name written carefully on a cream-colored card beside polished silverware. Not squeezed into a corner. Not folded onto an extra tray table. An actual seat. Waiting for me before I arrived. Vanessa emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands nervously on a towel. For once, her smile looked uncertain rather than polished. "Hello, Eleanor," she said quietly. I nodded politely. "Vanessa." An awkward silence hovered between us before she finally spoke again. I wanted to say, I realize I handled things badly at Lucas's birthday. Not apology exactly, but closer than before. I studied her face carefully. She looked tired now too. Less curated. Less certain of her control over the room. "It was not about the chair," I said calmly. Her expression flickered slightly because she understood immediately. It had never been about furniture. It was about whether someone felt welcome before they even entered the room. Dinner unfolded more quietly than usual that year. Not tense. Just honest in a way families rarely allow themselves to be. Several times during the meal, I caught Daniel watching me with something close to regret in his eyes. Lucas proudly told everyone about his baseball games while stealing extra dinner rolls from the basket beside my plate. At one point he leaned against my shoulder and whispered, "I like when you sit by me better." I squeezed his hand gently beneath the tablecloth. Later that evening, after dessert plates had been cleared away and relatives drifted toward the living room, I stood alone for a moment near the dining table. My chair remained slightly pulled back from where I had been sitting. Such a simple thing. A place prepared ahead of time. Space intentionally saved for someone. I rested my hand lightly against the top of the chair and realized something important. The cruelest part of being erased from a family is not loneliness. It is how easily you begin believing you deserve it. But standing there in the soft Thanksgiving light with my grandson